Today we're going to talk about the January 6th committee hearings and how they nailed down Trump in the most unmistakable way possible. And I have two interviews this week. Former White House communications director under President Obama and host of Pod Save America, Dan Pfeiffer, about whether the DOJ is moving too slowly, whether he thinks a Trump prosecution is likely, and how Democrats can compete with the MAGA disinformation machine. And gun reform activist Fred Gutenberg joins to discuss the tragic loss of his daughter, what he'd like to see Congress pass in the way of gun legislation, and his response to people like Ted Cruz for desperately trying to redirect calls for common sense gun legislation to stuff like doors. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. So the January 6th committee has begun to hold its hearings. I'll talk about what I think they were able to best accomplish in a moment, but first, I think what I was most struck by is just how angry I was all over again. And I didn't forget what happened. None of us forgot what happened on January 6th, but you do kind of forget the visceral fury that comes with being reminded of it. And I know that there was some worry that it would just be more of the same, that we already knew everything that happened on that day, but I can promise you after watching it that first off, there is so much that we didn't know. And second of all, that I am more inspired to do everything humanly possible to make sure that these people never take power again. Okay, so here's why I think the way the January 6th committee laid out these first hearings was brilliant. First, listen to a couple of these depositions from administration officials. There is a reason that they started off with these testimonies during the hearings, and there's a reason that I'm going to start off with them here first right now. Here's Alex Cannon, one of Trump's campaign lawyers.
I remember a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states.
When was that conversation?
Probably in November, mid to late November. I think it was before my child was born.
And what was Mr. Meadows' reaction to that information?
I believe the words he used were, "So there's no there."
Here's Jason Miller, a senior Trump campaign spokesperson.
I was in the Oval Office, and at some point in the conversation, Matt Oskowski, who is the lead data person, was brought on. And I remember he delivered to the president pretty blunt terms that he was going to lose.
And that was based, Mr. Miller, on Matt and the data team's assessment of the sort of county by county, state by state results as reported?
Correct.
Here's Bill Barr.
No, just what I've been through. I had three discussions with the president that I can recall. One was on November 23rd, one was on December 1st, and one was on December 14th. And I've been through sort of the give and take of those discussions. And in that context, I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And, I didn't want to be a part of it. And that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did. I observed, I think it was on December 1st, that, how can you can't live in a world where the incumbent administration stays in power based on its view, unsupported by specific evidence, that there was fraud in the election.
And here's Ivanka Trump.
Many of President Trump's White House staff also recognized that the evidence did not support the claims President Trump was making. This is the president's daughter commenting on Bill Barr's statement that the department found no fraud sufficient to overturn the election.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
In other words, it was made abundantly clear to Trump by his own administration officials, senior administration officials, that he lost the election. The January 6th committee played these taped depositions by senior staff under oath right at the very top of this hearing. And so then, when they went on to show just some of the carnage that happened on that day, all of it is with the understanding that the violence was all based on a lie, because they established immediately that Trump knew the truth about the election. So because they methodically showed that Trump was well aware that what he was doing was predicated on a lie, because he was told there was no fraud, he was told there was no path to victory, he was told that there was no way he could win this election, The fact that he chose to move forward with the big lie anyway is proof that he was defrauding this country. He knew the truth and yet chose to move forward with this violent plan anyway. He knew the truth and still tried to oversee his 7-point plan to prevent the transition of power. Knew the truth and still perpetrated the big lie. Knew the truth and still tried to replace the acting attorney general. He knew the truth and still tried to get a mob to pressure Mike Pence into refusing to certify the electoral votes. Knew the truth and still tried to pressure state legislators and state election officials to change the election results. Knew the truth and still tried to get a false slate of electors sent to Congress. Knew the truth and still tried to get a violent mob to, quote, show strength and march on the Capitol. He did all of this knowing the truth because he perpetrated a fraud on this country. And in the subsequent hearings, we'll learn more about just how involved in the planning he was and the extent to which he wanted this violence to actually happen and how much he and his circle coordinated with these white nationalist far-right militia groups. We'll learn all of that. But a masterful move by this committee to establish that the foundation here is that Trump was told all of this was a lie. So everything that follows will only prove the lengths that he was willing to go to perpetrate what he knew was a lie, what he knew was a fraud. All of this was done with corrupt intent because he knew the truth. Alex Cannon proved that, and Jason Miller proved that, and Bill Barr proved that, and even Ivanka proved that. And any DOJ that's even semi-conscious will have no choice but to indict him. Whether this DOJ will remains to be seen, but the case is being handed to them on the silver platter. So good on the January 6th committee for laying this out so masterfully, but let's also acknowledge that what Trump did was so corrupt, so overtly corrupt, that it shouldn't have taken an entire bipartisan committee of lawmakers and multiple hearings to prove it. But look, if that's what it takes to reach people, then so be it. And by the way, they are reaching people. According to just preliminary data from Nielsen, about 20 million people tuned in just to the first hearing alone. And that doesn't include any numbers from streaming or the internet, which counts for millions more. I had a couple 100,000 tune into my streams alone, and I'll continue streaming every day of these hearings. So if you want to watch along with me, just subscribe to my YouTube channel, and during the hearings, you'll see my live stream right there on the top of the page. But wherever you watch, do make sure to tune in, because Republicans are desperately banking on you not caring, on you forgetting what Trump and his sycophants did to this country on January 6th and continue to do to this very day. So don't give them the satisfaction. I've got 2 interviews this week, so to watch my interview with former White House Communications Director under President Obama and Pod Save America host Dan Pfeiffer about whether the DOJ is moving too slowly, whether he thinks a Trump prosecution is likely, and how Democrats can compete with the MAGA disinformation machine, and to watch my interview with gun reform activist Fred Gutenberg to discuss the tragic loss of his daughter, what he'd like to see Congress pass in the way of legislation for guns, and his response to people like Ted Cruz for desperately trying to redirect calls for common sense gun legislation to stuff like doors. Check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel.